Hey, it's Linus here. In this video, I'll be sharing with you Mark Minervini's cheat and low cheat entries. So what are these cheat and low cheat entries? These are Mark Minervini's setup and Mark Minervini's pivot point. So they are entry positions which Mark Minervini takes when entering his positions in a stock. Why should we learn Mark Minervini's cheat and low cheat entries? To answer that, we'll first take a look at who Mark Minervini is if you don't already know him. So Mark Minervini is one of the stock market wizards featured in Jack Schwager's book. And Mark Minervini managed to achieve 5 consecutive years of triple-digit returns. During that period, he managed to average an annual 220% returns and an incredible 33,500% total return during that same period. So I think Mark Minervini's results in the stock market speak for themselves. And that is why in today's video, we'll be taking a look at Mark Minervini's cheat and low cheat entries. So the cheat and low cheat entries are a few of Mark Minervini's entry points. In total, Mark Minervini has 3 entry points in a base pattern. So the first is the standard pivot point, the second is the cheat entry, and the third is the low cheat entry point. So in today's video, we'll be taking a look at the cheat entry and the low cheat entry point. While these 3 offer different entry points in a base pattern, they all share the same similar characteristics. So these are the characteristics that they share. The first is tightening up in price, and the second is contraction in volume. So we want to see Mark Minervini's volatility contraction pattern characteristics in these entry points. I have a video over here talking more about the volatility contraction pattern by Mark Minervini. But basically what the volatility contraction pattern or VCP pattern means is that we want to see these 2 characteristics in the entry points. So the first is the tightening up in price, and the second is contraction in volume. So just take note that all of these entry points in a base pattern, the standard pivot point, the cheat entry, and the low cheat entry all should display these VCP pattern characteristics. Okay, now that we have gone through the characteristics of these entry points, let's take a look at where these entry points are at in a base pattern. Okay, so this is not the best drawing you'll get of a base, but I believe that this still does a good job of explaining the 3 different entry points in a base. Before we take a look at the 3 different Mark Minervini's entry points in a base, we'll separate the base into 3 different areas. So we'll separate the top first, and then another separation over here. So for the top part of the base, which is the upper third of the base, that is where our standard pivot point and the handle area is for a base. So if you are familiar with a cup and handle pattern, this area over here is the handle area. Right, so the upper third of the base is where the standard pivot area and the handle area is. Below this upper third area, we have the middle third. And this middle third area is where the cheat area is for Mark Minervini. And even lower in the base, in the lower third of the base, is where Mark Minervini's low cheat entry is at. So these are Mark Minervini's 3 different entry points in a base. The standard pivot area or the handle area, then the cheat, followed by the low cheat area. So now let's take a look at the individual cheat and low cheat areas. So for Mark Minervini's cheat setup, as we have seen earlier on, the cheat setup is at the middle third or just below the halfway point of the cup and handle pattern or the base area. And at this cheat setup area, we want to see a contraction in price and volume. So basically the VCP pattern forming in the cheat setup area. Okay, so now let's take a look at some examples of a cheat setup in a base. Okay, so for this price chart, you'll see that prices form a base pattern over here. And then this is the upper third of the base. And then this is the middle third or just below the halfway point of the base. And then you can see over here, prices are forming a cheat setup. So why is this area a cheat setup? So at this part of the base over here, the reason why this is a cheat setup is because there's a contraction in price over here. So prices tighten up at this point over here. And then we see that volume is also contracting at that part of the base. So this is Mark Minervini's cheat setup. So where will he enter his position in stock? He will enter when the stock breaks above this cheat setup. So as you can see over here, this is the upper range. So when prices break above this upper range and above the cheat setup area, that is where he will enter his position in the stock. Now let's take a look at another example. So over here, you can see that prices are forming a base. And you'll notice that at this point over here, it is at the middle third or just below the halfway point of the base. And that is why this is a cheat setup area. But it's not just because prices are at the middle third or just below the halfway point of a base that makes it a cheat setup. For it to be considered a cheat setup, we want to see prices contracting at this area and volume also contracting. So over here, we see that prices increase substantially and then it tightens up over here. So it fulfills the first criteria, which is the contraction in price. And then corresponding to this area, we see that volume also starts to decline. And this fulfills the second criteria, which is a contraction in volume. And that is why this makes it a cheat setup area. So where would the entry point be? The entry point will be where prices break above this upper range. So over at this green candlestick over here. So you can see that after prices break above from this cheat setup area, prices manage to move up quite substantially. So from this chart, you can see the power of a cheat setup. The cheat setup provides a good entry point for a stock to rise substantially after that. Furthermore, by entering at a cheat setup area, it not only increases your probability of getting returns from that area, it also lowers your risk. Therefore, using the cheat setup to enter your position in the stock gives you a good risk to reward ratio. Now let's take a look at a cheat setup and a standard pivot point or a handle area. So for this stock ZIM, we see that prices form both the cheat area and a handle area. So over here we see that this is a base pattern, and then the handle area will be over at this upper third of the base. And where would the cheat be? This would be the cheat setup area, because this is at the middle third or just below the halfway point of the base. And you can see that over here, prices fulfill the two criteria. The first is prices are contracting, and the second is that we see there's a contraction in volume. So it fulfills the two criteria, and that is why we can consider this a cheat area. So that is Mark Minervini's cheat setup. Now let's take a look at Mark Minervini's low cheat setup. So just now we went through Mark Minervini's cheat setup. And for the cheat setup, it occurs at the middle third or just below the halfway point of the base. For the low cheat setup, it occurs at the lower third of the cup and handle pattern or the lower third of the base. And similarly, in the low cheat setup, we want to see a contraction in price and volume. So we want to see prices displaying the VCP pattern characteristics at the low cheat setup too. So what does the low cheat setup look like on the chart? Let's take a look. So this is an example of a low cheat setup. So over here we see prices forming a base, and this is the upper third of the base, and then this is the middle third of the base, and this is the lower third of the base. And because this is at the lower third of the base, this is the low cheat setup. And again, this is a low cheat setup not just because of its position in the base. Prices also have to meet those two criteria as we have mentioned earlier on. Contraction in price and contraction in volume. So over here we see prices contracting and prices are tight. And on top of prices contracting, we also see volume contracting at this low cheat setup. So if it meets the two criteria and it's at the lower third of the base, that is when we can consider it as a low cheat setup. So where do we want to enter our position in the stock? We want to enter where prices break above this upper range. So on this candlestick over here. So once prices break above this range, you can enter your position in the stock. And you can see that in just a couple of trading sessions, prices move up very fast. And that is the power of these kind of setups. The reason why prices can move very fast after it comes out from these setups, because these setups are at the line of least resistance. This is where the supply of the stock is very little, and just a bit of demand can push prices up very quickly. And that is why we want to identify these kind of setups in a base pattern. Now let's take a look at another example of a low cheat setup. So this is a price chart for Unity software which I traded just recently. So over here you can see that Unity software was forming a large base. And if you notice over here, this is at the lower third of the base. And then at this lower third of the base, you can see that prices were contracting. And on top of that, you see that volume was also contracting at this area over here. And this makes it a low cheat setup. So where would we want to enter our stock? We want to enter our stock when prices break above this upper range over here. So on this candlestick over here. So you can see that after you enter your position at this area, prices rose up very quickly. So that's a rundown of Mark Minervini's entry points in a base pattern. So we talked about two entry points in a base pattern. First is the cheat setup, and the second is the low cheat setup. And we see how powerful these setups can be if we identify them correctly. So hopefully you have enjoyed and learned something from this video. If you did, smash that like button because it will really help the channel grow and allow me to produce more content such as this. And if you are new to this channel and haven't already subscribed, make sure you subscribe because each week I release new videos about investing, trading, and the stock market. I'll see you in those other videos. To your financial success.